testing the live stream. How's that?
That's good.
A little better?
Yeah.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jan Guise. I'm the director of the Music Library. I'm so pleased to have some folks here in person in the Music Library for our first real event since we reopened in September. And we're also live streaming this to lots of folks at home. So thank you very much to everyone who's at home watching this live. So we're here to celebrate our 100th anniversary. And first, I'm going to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the Music Library operates has, for thousands of years, been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. It's still home to many Indigenous peoples. Throughout my career, I've had the freedom to move, live, and work wherever life took me through Canada and the United States. I've been interested as I've been researching the last 100 years of this music library and thinking about the land that we're on. I've been interested to read about the Toronto Purchase Treaty of 1787, which was revised in 1805 and settled in 2010. And that treaty deals with the lands on which this building resides today. And I was interested to compare the way the history of that treaty was written by the Mississaugas of the Credit and in the online Canadian Encyclopedia. So if you're interested, you might. I encourage you to look at that history. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to work on this land, and I've committed to continue learning the true history of Indigenous peoples. Today, our program includes introductory remarks from some distinguished guests, a brief history of the library by me, and musical performances by two graduate students, pianist Jialiang Zhu and cellist Andrew Ascenzo, who you heard earlier. Thank you very much to both of you. They are two members of the Bedford Trio, and the third member was not able to be here today. So first, let me call upon our first speaker, who's Larry Alford, the Chief Librarian of the University of Toronto Central Libraries. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Jan, and hello, everybody. Am I talking loud enough for the... I get a thumbs up, great. So good afternoon. I want to welcome you on behalf of the University of Toronto Libraries. I'm delighted to be here and to welcome you to the 100th anniversary celebration of the Music Library at the University of Toronto. I, perhaps sadly, am old enough and have been a librarian long enough to have participated in many celebrations of library anniversaries at 3 different institutions, and I think it's always an exciting occasion because it recognizes the extraordinary achievement of many staff, in this case staff for over a century, who actually build libraries, who build great collections, whether they are print or electronic, and who serve the needs of faculty, students, scholars, both their research and learning needs. And so I think it's always a way to recognize and celebrate not just the great collections, and this is one of the great music collections, if not the greatest. I think it's not an exaggeration to say the greatest in Canada, one of the greatest in North America, to celebrate that achievement, but also the work of a century of staff. I think we're very fortunate to have the Music Library as part of Canada's largest and best research library system. For those of you who don't know, the UTL is ranked 3rd among North American academic libraries, just below Harvard and Yale, and consists of some 40 libraries across the university, including at UTM and UTSC. It's my understanding in 1921, the University of Toronto Faculty of Music took over the operation of the Toronto Conservatory of Music, the Conservatory's Music Library, which is, I believe, why we're celebrating the 100th anniversary today. And the collection has flourished through the acquisition of extraordinary collections, both by librarians and library staff in the central library system and also within the Faculty of Music, but also, and as importantly, I think, through donations of music enthusiasts, of alumni of the faculty, of faculty members, and of people interested in music and music collections and musicology. And as I said earlier, through the expert curation and work of really dedicated and expert staff. It's my understanding, actually Jan told me this, I didn't know this, that the U of T's first full-time chief librarian prior to his appointment in 1892, the library had been administered by part-time faculty members, but Hugh Langton was the first full-time chief librarian, and I understand in 1921 he traveled to Europe to buy collections on some of his European buying trips, as well as made donations to the music library himself. I have to say that no one has asked me to go to Europe to buy collections, which might tell you something about how the role of the chief librarian has changed, but I'd be happy to go and buy some collections for you if you like. As I say, thanks to our generous donors, the music library has many, many special collections and treasures. I remember my first tour of the music library now about 10 years ago and seeing just some of the extraordinary things that were sequestered all around this space. A lot of that is now, I think, been cataloged and preserved and various things, but it really, I was blown away. And again, I've been a librarian now for almost 40 years. I was blown away by really the extraordinary collections that were here. Examples include a 14th century processional, first editions of Mozart, Beethoven, and Gershwin, previously unknown and unpublished violin concerto by Johann Halvorsen, which got a lot of publicity a few years ago. And the music library is making great strides in digitizing its treasures in partnership with the Internet Archive. This work raises the profile of the music library around the world. More importantly, it facilitates the use of these truly stunning collections, these collections of world-class importance for research. It facilitates their use by scholars regardless of their location, and the digitization was essential to researchers and scholars and students during the pandemic lockdown. So I understand you can visit the digital collections and exhibitions at the end of this program. The music library is also doing what I consider to be critical work to diversify its collection in concert with other librarians and staff across the library system in support of anti-racism at the University of Toronto and in the larger Toronto community. The music library is committed to expanding its collection of literature and music by BIPOC musicians and scholars and making its existing collections of BIPOC material much more visible to users. I think that is one of the highest priorities and the most critical initiatives of the music library and of the libraries in general moving forward. An important recent initiative is the Music Collection Assessment Summit that I think Jan organized and was hosted in April of 2021. Together with peers from Harvard, Yale, the Eastman School, UCLA, and Indiana universities, the music librarians and archivists welcomed over 200 music library professionals from around the world, I assume largely virtually, but 200 music library professionals to really look at the problem and to figure out solutions on managing, sharing, and diversifying music collections both now and into the future. So I look forward to see the accomplishments in the next century at the music library. And now I am delighted. We just met for the first time in person. We've seen each other on the vast number of Teams and Zoom meetings since you came, but I'm delighted to pass the microphone to Dean Ellie Hisama, and I really want to take this opportunity to publicly welcome her to the university and to the Faculty of Music. I look forward to working with her.
So I wanted to send greetings to everyone here virtually and in the room. I'm really pleased to be here to help celebrate this wonderful library. I wanted to start with a personal note by saying my happiest moments have been in libraries. My parents immigrated from Japan and didn't have a lot of money, so we couldn't buy books. So my mother instantly got us library cards to the local public library where we maxed out our 20 per week, reading all sorts of course, Little Women and just acclimating ourselves to life in the United States. This library is particularly beautiful and historic, and Jan took me on a tour early in my days here of the library, so I've been so impressed by what goes on here. It's really a treasure. On behalf of the Faculty of Music, I'm pleased to welcome you to this 100th anniversary celebration of the University of Toronto Music Library. For the past century, the Music Library has been the heart of the Faculty of Music. Today, our faculty, staff, and students are privileged to have access to the largest music research collection in Canada. Our community relies on the expert staff of the Music Library to hone their research skills and to find repertoire for performance. Music Library staff sit on many Faculty of Music committees and lend their voices to important planning initiatives and keep us informed of library services and collections. The Music Library showcases faculty, student, and alumni publications and performances with physical and virtual exhibitions. We're grateful for this work, which raises the profile of our community at home and abroad. We also appreciate that the Music Library holds important archival collections of alumni, former faculty members, and music organizations which attract researchers from around the world. We're very proud of the collaborations and partnerships that exist between the faculty and the library. An important partnership from the past is the Alnick Rare Book Room behind you, named for Harry Alnick, professor of musicology from 1954 to 1983. He purchased many hundreds of rare and special items for the Music Library throughout his tenure, and it was quite fun to visit that room in particular. I have a soft spot for things rare and precious. A recent example is the collaboration with our student-led Anti-Racism Alliance to create the library's wonderful digital exhibition, Polyphony, Diversity and Music. You can view this exhibit at the end of today's program. And I wanted to thank Larry for highlighting the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging initiatives, which to me are part of what we need to focus on collectively as a team, as a family, because the time is now to include what has not been included before, to really be aware and have at the forefront of our consciousness the many voices, people who have not been recognized and been part of faculties of music. So I fully support Larry's call for action around EDIB work. And last, I wanted to thank the amazing staff here, including Jan. I wish I could spend more time. I'm up in the second floor, like writing memos, reading emails, etc. But I hope to have you see me just quietly reading a book once in a while, which is what I did before July 1st. And I will pass the microphone to Stephen Vande Moortele, Associate Dean of Research and Chair of our Library Advisory Committee.
Thank you so much, Ellie and Larry. And Stephen actually cannot be with us here today. Sorry about that, Ellie. So I will pass the mic over to the president of our Music Graduate Students Association, Alexis Miares-Thompson.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Jan, for offering the opportunity to say a few words today. On behalf of students at the Faculty of Music, I'd like to offer our sincerest congratulations to the Music Library. We truly appreciate all the work of the librarians and archivists and all staff who contribute to caring for and maintaining the library. Without your work and your assistance, without the books, scores, collections, and recordings, and much more, we, the students, could not do our work or our research. Not only are we grateful for your hard work, but we're also very proud to have Canada's biggest music library. It's not just a place to access resources and services. It's also a place where communities are built and flourish. On a given day, the music library may be a small part of anyone's day, but over time, these moments contribute greatly to our lives and our communities. Running into a friend makes visiting the library that much better. The Music Library is a cherished part of our community, and we hope for another 100 years and many more. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alexis. That's very kind, very nice to hear. So now I will offer a very brief history of the Music Library. And this is extracted from articles that we have published earlier this year in Open Shelf, which is the magazine of the Ontario Library Association. You will see a link to these articles, which commemorate our anniversary. They're in the program on our website. In 1921, University of Toronto Faculty of Music took over operation of the Toronto Conservatory the Conservatory of Music's library. The library remained in the conservatory building through the first half of the 20th century. Its collection was expanded through gifts in kind from local musical community and purchases by the University of Toronto Central Library. Kathleen McMorrow, my predecessor, made a compelling case in a 2002 article for Hugh Langton, U of T's chief librarian of the time, as Larry mentioned earlier, spearheading the university's official commitment to a music collection. Langton was an accomplished amateur musician, and in 1922 he donated approximately 24 music scores from his personal collection. In addition, Langton had just returned from a European buying trip for the library, and its results included the addition of 12 books on music, plus recent scores, such as Stravinsky's Chant du Rossignol and Sacre du Printemps, and several early tone poems by Richard Strauss, presumably purchased from his general discretionary fund. And you and I can definitely talk about a European buying trip later, Larry. Langton continued donating items from his own substantial personal music collection until his death in 1950. So it was several decades. In 1927, a description of the music library appeared in the Conservatory Quarterly Review. The article gives a glimpse into the strengths of the collection at the time, as the librarian used a basic classification system of books grouped in 7 categories: biography, fiction, history, organ, voice, piano, and theory, and scores in 8 categories: oratorio, opera, songs, anthems, piano, organ, chamber music, and orchestral works. And of course, nowadays, the classification system we use is much, much more detailed and has many discrete categories. It did not take long for the library to run out of space. In 1934, the expanding music collection moved to a new space in the same building. A notice appeared in the Conservatory Quarterly Review celebrating the library's new, improved location. And it said Adelaide Digman Bartman was assigned the task of installing a system whereby the library might be used to better advantage by teachers and students alike. For 3 months, Mrs. Bartman had been deeply engrossed in the work of classifying, cataloging, card indexing, and numbering the hundreds of volumes. Following the move, Miss Lillian Bath of the Conservatory office staff was appointed librarian. Notable special collections at this time were a very rare and unique collection of books printed during the 17th and 18th centuries, which included theory textbooks, songs, glees, ballads, and more. Miss Jean Lavender became head librarian in 1947. Through the first half of the 20th century, the chief librarian and the Central Library continued funding music purchases, and by the 1950s, the collection occupied 2 spaces. The Central Library housed scholarly works, critical editions of scores, reference materials, and periodicals, and the Conservatory Library housed performing editions of scores, as well as instructional materials. Both the expanding Faculty of Music and its library collections needed more space, and in 1962, the university opened the Edward Johnson Building. Edward Johnson was a Canadian opera singer who served as general manager of the Metropolitan Opera in New York City from 1935 to 1950. You're going to hear more about Edward Johnson from Stephen Clarke later in the program. So Miss Lavender, the head librarian, oversaw the bringing together of the 2 disparate collections into one Edward Johnson library. That library was located on the 3rd floor upstairs from where we stand today. At this time, the collection comprised 80,000 volumes, books, journals, music scores, and several thousand 78 RPM and 33 1/3 RPM records. Dr. Harvey Olnick was a professor of musicology in the Faculty of Music from 1954 to 1983. he quickly became a self-appointed champion of the music library, and it is said that it is through his efforts that our collection became the finest in Canada. Our rare book room behind you is named for him, as Ellie mentioned, in honor of the many rare and special materials that he collected on our behalf during his tenure. In 1974, Kathleen McMorrow, my predecessor, was appointed as head librarian. By the 1980s, the music library contained over 130,000 books, journals, music scores, and microforms. There were 80,000 LPs and 85,000 78 RPM discs in the Snyderman Recordings Archive, so named for the generous donations and standing orders arranged with Sam Snyderman of the eponymous and iconic record shop Sam the Record Man. A series of grants from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada funded the acquisition of late 19th and early 20th century music scores to fill important gaps. Notable special collections at this time were late 18th and 19th century French opera materials, 6,000 plus opera librettos, which are housed in the university's Fisher Rare Books Library, 19th and early 20th century Canadian sheet music, early treatises and histories, madrigal part books, and early Mozart and Handel editions. The library was also building archival collections, such as that of Edward Johnson, which includes his scores, recordings, signed photographs, medals, and other awards. The Faculty of Music expanded yet again in the late 1980s. The Rupert Edwards wing of the Edward Johnson Building opened in 1990. Much of the wing was devoted to a new music library, and that space is where we stand today. Comprising 2 levels, the library now has double the floor space, approximately 18,000 square feet, as well as a climate-controlled vault for rare and special materials. With the opening of the new space, the library also assumed responsibility for the ensemble collections, sets of conductors' scores and parts for large ensembles such as the university choirs, orchestra, and jazz orchestra. Kathleen McMorrow retired in 2013, and Suzanne Myers-Sawa was interim head librarian until her own retirement in 2016. James Mason, our metadata and digital initiatives librarian, took on the role of interim head until I assumed the position in 2017. So what will the next 100 years look like for us? Well, anyone who's visited our stacks will know we're out of space again. We're working on a strategic collection assessment, which Larry mentioned earlier, to move materials to off-site shelving and leave key materials here on site. And the Collection Assessment Summit that Larry mentioned, which was not only organized by me, but also by my entire team, was essential to that collection assessment work. In collaboration with the Internet Archive, we're working on digitization projects to bring our special collections to the world. CDs are giving way to YouTube and Spotify. Musicians perform music from their iPads, such as our cellist today. And the COVID-19 pandemic taught us not to take anything for granted. We have a great team here, and whatever the future holds, we have positioned ourselves well to lead the way. So next we're going to have a brief musical interlude by our 2 members of the Bedford Trio, and following that, I will introduce Stephen Clarke, who will give our next talk. treat it is to have live music in the library. It's now my pleasure to welcome Stephen Clarke to the podium. Stephen is a retired lawyer and lifetime researcher and practitioner of opera and vocal music. In 2020, he donated the Stratton Clarke Collection to our music library. This comprehensive collection of early to mid-20th century opera and vocal recordings is a boon to researchers interested in early recording techniques, performance practice, and composers, singers, and repertoire in the genre and of the time. The Stratton Clarke Collection is a wonderful example of the important role donors have played in the development of this music library. We will officially launch the Stratton Clarke Collection in the new year, so please consider this talk today a teaser of what is to come.
Thank you, Jan. I'll try to be concise. If I get going, I'll be too long. She already told you about myself. The collection was started in the 1940s by John Stratton, a lifelong resident of Toronto, who collected recordings of great singers of the past, was a singer himself, and wrote several articles about topics related to singing that were published in Opera Quarterly and the Journal of the British Institute of Recorded Sound, whose assets are now part of the British Library. He studied singing with Herbert Janssen in New York, and with Gina China and Axel Schutz. Both these are famous singers of the past, but Gina China and Axel Schutz both taught for a while at the Royal Conservatory here in Toronto. He worked in the arts department of Ryerson, teaching Greek philosophy to students there, and was actively involved in the reissue of early recordings, both on his own label, which was called Cantilena, and through Historic Masters, an organization based in the UK with special access to the EMI archive. It produced vinyl pressings of early recordings that had not been edited at all, using the metal parts from the early days of the production that still survived at the EMI archive, 85,000 of those 78 RPM metal parts. And they were sold on subscription to collectors. And they were mostly things that had never been previously issued before. John Stratton died in January 2001, and I became the custodian of his collection. I too studied singing, first with Howell Glynn, a Welsh bass who taught at the Royal Conservatory, later with Gladys Whitehead, Elizabeth Benson Guy, and Greta Krause, who was my leader coach for many years. I had aspirations to sing professionally, but didn't keep them long, and instead practiced law at a large firm in downtown Toronto. After John Stratton died, I was appointed to the Historic Masters Committee and then became its chair. I supported a great many reissues of early recordings, mostly in conjunction with Marston Records in Philadelphia. In my 20 years as custodian of the Stratton collection, I added my own collection of recordings. I acquired about 1,500 additional 78 RPM recordings from auctions, and about 7,500 digital dubbings of early recordings from the same period, which I have yet to deliver, but will deliver soon to Jan. And those dubbings are made from records from the collections of Sir Paul Getty, Ward Marston, Richard Bebb, and Lawrence Holdridge. And Richard Bebb was my predecessor as chairman of the Historic Masters Committee. And speaking of collecting tours to the UK or to Europe, I was aware of his collection of vocal scores, and after he died, his children sent me a list of the vocal scores, and I acquired 65 more period vocal scores that weren't in this collection and donated them to the library here. I've also created a searchable database of approximately 480,000 recordings that were issued in the 78 RPM era by the Gramophone Company and its corporate successors, which included EMI and HMV. The database would have been impossible without the help of a very clever computer program named Roger Tessier. EMI never had a searchable tool for its own output of recordings. And I'm now in the process of transferring hosting of that database to Universal Music in the UK, who are now the current corporate successors of EMI. The database is public and will remain public once it's transferred to Universal Music. It can be found at www.kellydatabase.org. It's up now. It's a list of recordings. You can't, at this point, you can't hear any of the recordings you can read about, but it's still a very important research tool. Because 78 RPM recordings are very breakable, that part of the collection does not circulate here and won't circulate. The LPs and CDs from the Stratton Clarke collection are just being merged with the collections here. There's a finding aid that has been developed by Rebecca Shaw, the archivist here. I'm very grateful to Rebecca for that. Completion of cataloging and doing all the acquisition work related to the collection is still a work in progress. If we had time for a tour, you could go downstairs and see about 450 boxes of recordings from the collection on the floor of the library here. They will eventually all be listed and available. I'm grateful to Jan Guise and Laurel MacDonald, who made it possible for me to move everything into the faculty building in the summer of 2020 when the EJB was completely shut down. And actually, it was easier to do it when the place was entirely empty because there wasn't an issue about meeting people and masking and all of this. We had the right people. It was before anyone was vaccinated as well. We moved the whole shebang in here then. It's essentially a research collection, and it's the largest collection of the kind of music that Jan has described in Canada. Anyone with an interest in opera, oratory, or serious song and looks at a list of the holdings cannot fail to notice how much the repertory has changed in the 120 years of recordings that we now have. The pioneer recording engineers had their work cut out because the famous singers at the beginning of the 20th century didn't want to make records. They had to be persuaded. And it wasn't because they thought the result of the recording was so poor. They were all amazed by the sound of recordings. It was because they thought their art, which was creative, was being captured and frozen by recordings, and they didn't like that. It's a common view that the success of the sales of Caruso's recordings was one of the main building blocks of the recording industry. And he was the first major singer to record in 1902. What people don't realize is that the first two things that Caruso recorded when he finally got in front of a horn to sing down were two arias from the opera Germania by a composer named Alberto Franchetti. And everyone goes, what? Understandably. That's just a sign of how much everything has changed. To be honest and accurate, the Deutsche Oper in Berlin in 2006 revived Germania. But it hasn't been done since, and I don't think it's likely to be. There is a DVD available of Germania, and it's possible to see why perhaps Caruso recorded the only two good bits. When I first got my hands on the whole collection, I wanted a listing of it. I was still practicing law full-time. I couldn't do it, so I got a couple of people to do it. And when I finally had a sort of a list, wasn't complete, but I arranged it alphabetically, and I started going through the surnames beginning with A, and came quickly to a singer named Agusturello Afra. And again, everyone's eyes go, what? Who? He was a French dramatic tenor of the late 19th and early 20th century. I thought, great, I recognize this name, because he actually was Romeo on the first complete recording of Gounod's Romeo and Juliet, made in 1912. I thought, oh, I know about Mr. Afra. And then I looked down the list of titles of Afra's recording, and I came to this record of an aria from an opera called Astarte by a composer named Leroux. And I'm going, huh? And Astarte is an opera by Leroux. Xavier Leroux, in fact, wrote 15 operas, all of which were produced, 8 of which were produced either at the Paris Opera itself or at the Opera Comique in Paris, and 1 of which was even produced at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. And then after that, and that was in 1919, and after that, Mr. LaRue fell off a cliff, or so it would seem, because nothing by LaRue has been done since. So you sort of go, how can you have a career like that, and be a success, and vanish? And that's one of what I found interesting about the whole collection, is how much has just vanished. He did write one song that has survived. It's called Le Nil, the Nile. And a recording that sold very well was made of it in 1914 by John McCormick, with a violin obbligato by Fritz Kreisler. So some names, even with this strange repertory, do come down to us. I found that I had 7 different recordings of an aria called De l'art splendeur immortelle, from an opera called Benvenuto Cellini, not by Berlioz, which is the Benvenuto Cellini everybody knows, but by Eugene Diaz. And not only did I have one recording, I had 7 different people singing that aria. And I thought, gosh. And I didn't know it when I first started this. I found many song and opera arias composed by Isidore de Lara, an English composer whose actual name was Isidore Cohen, who wrote his most successful opera was called Messalina, the wife of the Emperor Claudius, not a nice person from the Roman past. But he had a successful career in France. I mean, he made a living doing this, and his works were a success. And finally, on the subject of strange repertory, many, many, many recordings from an opera called Sigurd, which is French for Siegfried, by Ernst Reyer, the youngest composer ever to win the Prix de Rome. Sigurd is the French version of the Ring Cycle, and unlike Wagner, Reyer managed to get it done in one opera. And it stayed in the repertory at the Paris Opera for 50 years. It was premiered in 1885, and it was last shown in 1935, and it had about 200 performances. So it wasn't. They kept reviving it, but except for very odd regional houses in France, it's gone now. No one records from it. Anyway, I believe this is the sort of fodder for research. Another, Jan already mentioned, another area for research is the change in both vocal technique and musical values that are revealed by these old recordings. An example of a technical change, is there are very few singers left who can trill. And it surprises people that Wagner wrote all sorts of trills in his operas, but the people who sing Wagner today don't do them. I mean, they're marked in the score, but the singers don't even make a passing sort of gesture towards the fact that I know there's a trill there. I can't really do it, but I know it's there. They don't even do that. They just ignore the marking entirely. He even wrote a trill in Die Gute Dämmerung for the bass Hagen. And and there are recordings in the collection of baritones and basses doing trills from then. But you can't really find a baritone or a bass who can do that stuff now. It's hard to find a soprano who can do it. Even Caruso could trill. He only recorded one. It's in Handel's Largo. It's from his last recording session in 1920, but it's there. It's not long, but it's a really good trill. It's a real trill. It's not the suggestion of a trill. Finally, the third area of strength in this collection is Russian recordings before the Revolution. The gramophone company had a very good business going in Russia. Starting in 1900, they sent their engineers to Russia to record Russian singers, and they recorded them every year from 1900 to 1915, when the First World War stopped this sort of travel. And they reached sales of several 100,000 records a year in Russia. They had plants in Riga and a plant in Moscow. And when the German army was approaching Riga in 1915, someone, the corporate records don't reveal who it was, but someone realized that this stuff might all be lost. So they put the metal parts, not the printed records. They put the metals that you use to stamp the records. They put all the metals from the Riga plant onto a ship headed to London, and the ship got through. And those metal parts are still in the EMI archive in London. And that's one of the things that attracted the people at Historic Masters, was to issue these Russian recordings that had never been issued before. So I hope that there's fodder for research here, but I also hope that it's something for the merely curious. Most of it will end up at the U of T Downsview location because of the nature of the material, but it's all retrievable and it will all be listed. Now, I also donated this podium full of stuff so that, there are about 1,078s that I selected to sort of save and keep here for a while so that they could be played, so that people could hear the actual originals and hear them as well as you can. So that this has the most sophisticated sort of sound reduction equipment, and it can play any kind of format of records, not cylinders, but it can play vertical cut records and horizontally cut records. So I'm going to play a recording by Edward Johnson, after whom this building is named. And he was born in Guelph in 1879. He went to Italy to finish his vocal studies in 1909. He performed for 10 years in Italy as Edoardo Di Giovanni. During which time at La Scala, he was the first person to sing the role of Parsifal in Italy. This was the first year that Parsifal, that Cosima Wagner let anyone perform Parsifal outside of Bayreuth. And he performed it, needless to say, we wouldn't do it now, but he performed it in Italian, not in German. He married in 1910. He had one daughter. He became a widower in 1919. He returned to North America in 1919 and performed as Edward Johnson for the first time for 3 years at the Chicago Opera, and in 1922 made his debut at the Met in an opera called L'amore di tre re by a composer named Montemezzi, another known opera, but another opera that isn't done. He sang there for 13 seasons, and did 3 world premieres at the time. The King's Henchman, Mary Mount by Howard Hanson, and Peter Ibbotson were his 3 world premieres at the Met. All operas no one does. And he became the general manager of the Met in 1936, as we've heard, and retired in 1950. He died in 1959. He had his one child, a daughter, was named Fiorenza. She married the politician George Drew, who was the Premier of Ontario. And she laid the cornerstone of this building in 1962. So here is Edward Johnson singing the Improviso from Act 1 of Andrea Chenier by Umberto Giordano. The actual text is Un dia all'azzurro spazio, and it was recorded in 1915 for Italian Columbia, and it was when Johnson was still performing as Edoardo Di Giovanni. So this is the record. It says La Cigale is the label, which is the label of Italian Columbia. And on the label, he's still E. Di Giovanni. So this was actually made before he came back to North America. This was recorded in 1915. So here we go. To me has always been, if you have the right equipment and a good copy, how good the records sound, not how bad they sound, considering that it's now 106 years old, that recording. So it's I mean, there are recordings from the same time that are hard listening, but many that are not at all. They're pleasure. And that's actually copy that I bought from Richard Bebb's collection, where I got the scores. And that's all I was planning to say, so I'm happy to answer questions, I guess, later.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That brings us to the end of our program. For the folks at home, the live stream is going to end in just a few minutes, and we're going to put up a slide at the end of the live stream with links to various digital exhibitions and the articles in Open Shelf that I mentioned earlier, and also our Instagram account, which has been very active this year with 100th anniversary celebrations. So please stick around and check those things out. For the folks here on site, if you'd like to stick around, we have some displays around the library, and we're also going to have a stream on the screen just behind you of some photos and remembrances that were sent in by library fans. So thanks very much, and while we mill around here, Jialiang and Andrew will continue to play for us. Thanks, everyone.
Marvelous recording.
You didn't know Andrew Johnson could sing like that?
No, I didn't know he could sing like that, and the pseudonym is great.
He didn't make a lot of records, but he made a few.
Well, it's very special.
And thank you very much. You're welcome. For both this and for collection.
Yes, yeah, very special.
I hope they I just hope they get some use, and I'm just delighted they have a home, because I was terribly concerned that I would end up stopping a truck someday. And the studio I had full of stuff and books, scores, sheet music, records, and all the machinery of every kind. And all this stuff would be someone else's problem, and I thought, no, you can't do that, Stephen. You have to find a home for it.
We're glad you did.
Yes, very good. And graduate students always find the treasures, so.
Lots of research and dissertations.
Indeed.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to head back.
Yes, I
Okay.
know. Back to.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah,